This video focuses specifically on how to complete the Florida State University Human Subjects Protocol online application. You should review the video Planning Research with Human Subjects prior to this video because it includes essential information regarding planning for human subjects research, including types of research and the informed consent process. Though all institutional review boards must conform with the legal statutes, each may determine what the protocol includes and the required format. Information in this video specifically addresses the Florida State University IRB online protocol and may not correspond to other university IRB application processes as the format and content may differ. Researchers conducting research projects that involve human beings must follow legal and ethical guidelines for such research to protect their human subjects. According to the law, researchers must follow three ethical principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. At universities, the Human Subjects Committee, or Institutional Review Board, is charged with ensuring that all research involving human beings is carried out in an ethical and legal manner. All researchers studying human subjects must submit a protocol outlining their research to the IRB for approval prior to any engagement with human subjects. This video explains how to complete the protocol. Prior to starting work on your IRB protocol, first determine if your research falls into a category that does not require IRB approval. These include class projects only intended for class presentation, oral history research, or observing people where their identifying information is not collected and there is no interaction with them. Many projects involving only interview procedures are classified as oral history, which includes research described as ethnography or biography. In oral history projects, the participants are asked about their own thoughts, opinions, memories, and observations, which are presented as one person's viewpoint and are not considered representative of experiences of others. Oral history projects are not considered generalizable knowledge and are not required by law to be reviewed. However, at the university, all student research involving human subjects must be submitted for IRB review so that the university can make the determination if the project falls under oral history. Oral history projects will still require a release form, which is like a consent form giving you permission to use information from interviews with subjects. If you feel your project is oral history, prior to completing an IRB protocol, contact Professor Clendening or the Human Subjects Office staff regarding the project to have it reviewed. They will provide a pre-review of your project to determine if it falls under oral history or if a full IRB protocol and committee approval are needed. At Florida State University, human subjects protocols are submitted using an online form. You may access this form by searching Human Subjects on the FSU main website, then click on the HSRS online system link. You will need to create an account and log in if this is your first human subjects proposal. Complete an online human subjects training program, such as CITI, which is free to FSU researchers, or NIH, to learn more about protecting human subjects. The protocol application form includes a complete description of your project, tasks subjects will perform, information about your subjects and how you intend to recruit them, whether compensation is given, the risks and benefits, the confidentiality of the data, and the informed consent process. Please view the video Planning Research with Human Subjects in this series and make a plan for your research prior to starting work on your human subjects protocol form. You will need to prepare files, including all surveys, interview questions, stimuli presented to the participants, and other parts of the procedure, as well as consent and assent forms, scripts, or other consent documents prior to starting your application. Prior to working with the online form, you may want to print out or download the paper version of the application to prepare your answers. The paper form is found under Application Information on the FSU Human Subjects website. Graduate and undergraduate students will also want to consult with their faculty advisor regarding answers to the protocol questions prior to entering information in the online system. All decisions about how your protocol will work should be made prior to starting the application, including who your subjects are, what they will be asked to do, and the consent process. It's a good idea to plan your answers in a word processing program, then cut and paste into the online form. Make sure to save your work often. The online form will require you to save prior to moving to the next section. This video will next move through the online protocol form step by step and section by section. Some sections and the appendices are only needed for protocols with specific procedures or participant categories included as a part of the research. Other than these optional sections, which will appear online only if needed based on your answers to questions, all parts of the protocol application must be completed. Part 1.0. Read the PI assurance statement carefully and then click I agree. For Part 1.1, enter your project's title. If you have grant funding, either the title for the project and grant must match, or also enter the grant title in parentheses. Select if the project is a dissertation, thesis, teaching, or other. List a doctoral treatise or supervised research under Other. Enter the type of the research in the box. Complete your name and contact information, your university department, highest degree completed, and occupational position. Indicate the human subjects training you have completed. The City Human Subjects Training Program is available free through FSU. See the Human Subjects Committee website for more information. If this is your dissertation or thesis research, your name has to be in Part 1.2 and not Part 1.3. Complete Part 1.3 only if other researchers are working with you on this protocol as co-PIs or research staff. Click Add More if you have additional PIs or staff. If the list is long, you may append it as an attachment. Students, do not list your major professor or faculty advisor as a co-PI unless that individual is an active researcher on this project. You will have a place to list your major professor in Part 1.4. Part 1.4. If you are a graduate or undergraduate student researcher, click Faculty Advisor and list the information for your major professor or your research supervisor. Be sure to let your faculty advisor know when you have submitted your protocol and remind him or her that the online system will send your advisor an email requesting their approval. If you are a faculty or staff member, list your department or area chair's contact information, or, if you do not have a chair, then list the school or college dean's contact information. If you are a staff member where none of these categories seems to apply, click Other and list your supervisor's contact information. Part 2.1. If you have university or external funding for your research, or if you have applied for funding but have not received verification, click Yes. You will be asked for information about the funding sources on the next screen, including the name of the funding agency, the contact person for the funding source, and other details. If the funding is pending, you will be able to indicate that on the next screen. If you do not have university or external funding, click No. You will need to indicate how the costs will be covered. Common responses are costs for this project are minimal and will be covered by the researcher, There are no costs for this research, as Qualtrics is provided by the university, and costs will be paid by the researcher out of pocket. Part 3.1. Is this research proposal under review by any other review committees? Click Yes and Other IRB if you are conducting research at schools, hospitals, universities other than FSU, or other organizations that have an IRB. Often, the other IRBs will expect FSU IRB approval before they will approve the protocol. You must upload all approvals prior to initiating research. Allow extra time for review if multiple IRBs are involved. If your research protocol does not require approval of any other IRB, click No. You may need other approvals, such as permission to conduct research at a particular location that does not have its own IRB, but those are uploaded at the end of the protocol application. Part 4.1. Your answer here will likely be no, unless you receive compensation by a company that has an interest in the research or you have a financial stake in a commercial venture related to this research. If you need to check yes, check with the Human Subjects Office regarding methods to manage the conflict of interest. Part 5.1. It is not necessary or required to compensate your subjects. Click No if you are not giving subjects anything of tangible value for participation in your research project. Researchers may choose to compensate subjects if it provides a larger participant pool, if the researcher is asking the participant to spend a lot of time or effort participating in the research, or if some type of services or supplies are provided to the participants as part of the research. Click Yes if you are giving subjects anything valuable for participation in your research. Valuable items may include course credit or extra credit, gifts or raffling off a gift card to participants, services like free lessons or music therapy services, payment for their time, or reimbursement for their expenses to participate. If you are compensating subjects in any way, the amount and type of compensation should be appropriate for what you are asking the participants to do. Some protocols offer payment or credit by the hour or otherwise matched to the effort required of the participants. If you are requiring multiple sessions or for participants to travel to a location, consider compensation for time or transportation expenses. Compensation must not be coercive, so valuable that potential participants do not feel able to freely decline participation. This can particularly be an issue with international research or if working with persons who have limited financial resources. For international locations, take the hourly wage and local customs into consideration prior to deciding the compensation rate. If you are giving course credit or extra credit, it is essential to offer students an alternative means to gain equivalent credit that does not require research participation. It is not acceptable to require students to participate in research as a part of a course or employees to participate as a part of their work assignment. There are very specific rules for compensation for prisoners. Check with the Human Subjects Office if your protocol includes prisoners. Part 6. Protocol Description and Other Detail. This is the main body of the proposal, where you will describe your human subjects research in detail. Prior to completing this portion online, prepare your thoughts using a word processor and cut and paste them into the online protocol. Do not paste in lengthy prose from your prospectus or a grant application. Edit your responses to be complete but concise and to respond specifically to the question that is asked. You should only include information required to evaluate the human subjects portion of your research. Part 6.1. This box looks small, but it will expand to include a complete and detailed description of your proposed research. All elements of your research plans should be explained in Part 6.1, even though you will also be providing detail in other parts of the protocol about some of the components. It is fine if information is repeated elsewhere. Your protocol description should be complete and thorough. This part should tell the story of your research: who, what, where, when, how, and why, in a clear and compelling way that others who are not specialists in your area can understand. If you are using acronyms or abbreviations, explain what they stand for. Also, define or explain any technical terms that would be unfamiliar to non-specialists. Make sure to include all information necessary for the reviewers to know what you are doing from your description. Part 6.2. Check any of these categories that apply to your research. The options are a mix of types, including protected populations, categories of subjects, types of research activities, locations for research, and other elements that must be addressed in the protocol, consent forms, and attachments. For the following categories, additional information is required if you check the box because they require special protections as subjects: mentally or physically challenged subjects, children or minor subjects, prisoners, parolees, or incarcerated subjects, pregnant subjects, or subjects whose primary language is not English. Additional information is also required if the research involves deception, which requires an explanation of why it is necessary and a debriefing script, the exclusion of women or children, which must be justified, or questionnaires or surveys, which you must attach to the protocol. Part 6.3. Check if your human subject research is limited to one of these: research on normal educational practices in commonly accepted educational settings, research involving educational tests, or research involving survey or interview procedures. Otherwise, leave those checkboxes empty. Answer questions 1, 2, and 3 regarding confidentiality, risks of criminal or civil liability or financial standing, and illegal or immoral conduct. If your research involves the study of existing data, documents, records, archives, or specimens, check the last box in this part. Part 6.4. Check any of the research methods you will use. You may check more than one if appropriate. If you are using a methodology not listed here, check Other and add information about it. Part 6.5. This is a very important box in which you will explain in detail, clearly and accurately, what tasks or activities you are asking participants to do as a part of your research. You will need to duplicate and elaborate upon the information provided about your research in Part 6.1. Like that previous box, this one will expand to include all of the information that is necessary for the reviewer to understand every step of your research process that actively involves human subjects. If you indicate that you are using surveys, questionnaires, interview questions, focus group questions, images, or other materials mentioned here, you must attach them at the end of the application. Outline what subjects will be asked to do and when, especially if there are multiple tasks involving subjects or several different groups of subjects. If you intend to conduct a pilot study, or if your protocol includes several phases, explain that in Part 6.1 and here. Part 6.6. Answer the question regarding how long you think the research will take. Include time needed to process data and finish writing about your research findings. You will need to keep your protocol open and approved as long as you are working with the data, even if all human-subject interaction has concluded. Part 7.1. How many participants do you intend to recruit? Consider all components of your research and enter the total number of male and female participants here. If you're not sure, give your best guess. If you will be working with participants over several years, you will want to think about the total number of participants you are planning to recruit, though you can ask for additional participants through a change of protocol or when your protocol is up for annual renewal. Part 7.2. Check any age ranges that apply. If you're working with children or minors, you will need both parental consent and child assent for participation in research. If you are working with people 65 or older, you will need to have a means of determining if your participants are cognitively able to give their consent. If not, you will need guardian consent and participant assent. Part 7.3. Check if children are included or excluded. If there is no benefit to children as a part of the research, check that box. If you were working with a population where children would not normally be a part of that population, like college students, professionals, employees, or retired persons, that is a justification for excluding children. Part 7.4. Check if your participant population includes any of these protected categories. Each category checked will open appendices related to appropriate handling of those protected populations later in the protocol form. Part 7.5. Indicate your criteria for including subjects in your study. These may include the subject's age, location, profession, or other specific characteristics of the subjects. Exclusion criteria will indicate how you will identify subjects who do not have the desired characteristics. For medical procedures, exercise protocols requiring exertion, or others where the subject's health is a concern, there often will be exclusions of persons who might be injured or put at risk by participating. Part 7.6. Indicate all locations where research activities including human subjects will take place. For Part 7.7, describe the reasons you have selected these locations for your research. For many of these locations, you will need written permission from an administrator in charge of the location to conduct research there. Upload letters of permission as attachments at the end of your protocol, or indicate that permission is pending. You may not conduct research at a location that requires permission until you have written documentation of permission uploaded to your protocol. Part 8.1. How do you plan to recruit your participants? Common ways include sending an email invitation to participate, posting a flyer with information about your study, making an announcement about the study in a class, or listing your study on the FSU Research, Departmental Research Pool, or Mechanical Turk websites. Describe your process for recruiting subjects in Part 8.1. Who will be approaching the subjects? How? When? And where? Will reminders be sent or follow up? You must attach copies of all recruiting materials such as email, texts, phone scripts, posters, announcements, etc. to your protocol at the end for IRB approval. Part 8.2. Explain in this box who will do the recruiting and how you will protect privacy for participants. Privacy protection includes avoiding posting or passing around a list for participant sign-up where others could see who is participating, and keeping the identity of participants and non-participants confidential to the extent possible. Part 8.3. Class lists Organization email lists and other types of lists are considered records. If you are using these types of recruiting methods, you need to check yes. Private medical records fall under HIPAA regulations, which must be followed if you are collecting or using medical information. Student records are information held by a school or university, including standardized test scores, grades, and other non-public student information. Part 8.4. Check no unless you are receiving incentives from an outside entity or giving incentives to research staff to recruit participants for this study. This is an unusual circumstance, but researchers and research staff are not permitted to accept gifts or incentives for research activity according to FSU policy. Part 9.1. Check any categories that apply to your research. If none of these potential risks applies, you do not need to check anything. One of the most common categories is any probing for personal or sensitive information in surveys, interviews, or questionnaires. If you are using deception, you must check use of a deceptive technique. Part 9.2. Minimal risk is defined as more risk than encountered in the conduct of everyday life activities. Does your project involve more than minimal risk? If so, check yes. If your project involves no more than minimal risk, check no. Describe in the box all possible risks subjects might encounter participating in your research. You must also mention all risks in the consent form. Part 9.3. Explain here how you are minimizing risks and protecting your subject's welfare. If you have multiple groups, or if your population of participants includes protected populations, answer this question for each group if their risk is different. For many protocols, breach of privacy is a risk. How are you protecting participants' privacy? Part 9.4. Are there potential benefits to individual subjects? If so, list them here. If not, enter none. Part 9.5. Are there potential benefits to society? If so, list them here and explain how the benefits outweigh the risks. If there are no potential benefits to individuals or to society, then you should not be using humans in conducting your research. Part 10. Confidentiality. A substantial potential risk to subjects in a research context is breach of privacy, including release of sensitive data. This section engages different ways of protecting privacy for your human subjects. These may include assigning code numbers or names to subjects and keeping a master list that matches names to codes, or keeping the identifiable information in a password-protected computer. If the information is truly sensitive, additional layers of protections may be needed. Part 10.1. Are you collecting individually identifiable information, such as names, addresses, telephone numbers, email addresses, etc.? If so, check yes. Explain in the box why you are collecting this information and how you intend to keep it private. If you do not intend to collect individually identifiable information, check no. Part 10.2. If you are using a coding system to keep data confidential, will you retain a link between the subject code and the personal information you have collected after data collection is complete? If so, check yes. Explain why you need to do that and how long you will keep that connection in your data records. Part 10.3. If Part 10.2 is yes, are you sharing that link with others? Check yes and explain why, otherwise check no. Part 10.4. How will you store your research data? For data that is not very sensitive, keeping the identifiable information in a password-protected computer or in a locked file cabinet can be adequate. If the information is truly sensitive, additional protections may be needed, such as a computer with no internet connection in a secured room. How long will you keep the data? Either indicate a time frame or date, or state indefinitely. Include information about data storage and destruction in the consent form. Part 10.5. Only check Yes here if you are placing a copy of the consent document or other research study information in the subject's record, such as a medical, personal, or educational record. This may apply to medical studies, prison studies, studies in retirement or nursing facilities, or some studies in pre-college educational settings where staff need to know that an individual has consented to research or that a guardian has given consent. Part 11.1. If you are not accessing protected health information from your subjects, check No. If you are accessing protected health information, you need to check with the Human Subjects Office about meeting the requirements for handling and storage of this sensitive information in a way that conforms with the HIPAA regulations. Part 12. The Informed Consent Process. Prior to completing this portion of the Human Subjects Protocol form, you will need to prepare your consent or assent forms, scripts, or other documents. Instructions for preparation of consent forms are included in the video Planning Research with Human Subjects and on the FSU Human Subjects Committee website under Samples and Forms. Part 12.1. What will be your process for gaining consent from your participants? Explain here how you are using the consent forms, assent forms, consent or assent scripts, or other types of consent documents or procedures for gaining consent from your participants. If you have several groups of participants with different consent procedures, like teachers and students doing different research tasks, subjects completing a survey where some will also be interviewed, explain each. Part 12.2. When will consent be obtained? It must be prior to collection of any data or any engagement with the subjects. How does this consent process fit into the time frame of the research? Part 12.3. Who will be obtaining consent, and how is that person trained in the process of obtaining informed consent? Part 12.4. If working with participants in person, it is typical to ask questions that confirm they understand the consent form. What questions will you ask? If you are obtaining consent online or in other settings, this part of the process may not apply. Part 12.5. When consent is obtained without the researcher collecting a written consent form is called waiver of documentation of consent. Online surveys, where participants click a link to access the survey, then click Yes or I consent after reading the consent form to indicate consent and proceed to the survey, is a common use of waiver of documentation of consent. Participants read the consent form and clicked to indicate consent, but there is no signed form. Request waiver of documentation of consent is appropriate if the only record linking the participant and the response would be the consent form and data is intended to be collected anonymously. This category is also appropriate where no identifying information is collected and written consent would not normally be needed outside the research context. Waiver of documentation of consent may also be approved for protocols using a consent script instead of a form, quick interviews where no identifying information is collected, surveys where turning it in indicates consent, and where possession of a signed form could be problematic, such as foreign countries where written consent is uncustomary or could endanger a subject. Request waiver of consent applies to any circumstance where research is conducted without a full informed consent process, not where there is consent and no documentation. Waiver of consent is rarely approved by the FSU IRB. The protocol must meet specific guidelines, including minimal risk, that it is impractical or impossible to obtain consent, and the research has potential of great benefit, or that the consent process might endanger a participant. Appendices will only open if you have checked relevant boxes earlier in the protocol. They include prisoners as subjects in research, inclusion of vulnerable populations, use of deception, pregnant women, human fetuses, and neonates, use of protected health information, and children involved as subjects of research. Please contact the Human Subjects Office if you are proposing a project involving prisoners, as there are specific legal guidelines that must be met to conduct research in prisons, rules for the interaction with prisoners, and institutional permissions from the prison that must be obtained. Disabled persons, minority groups, and/or whose primary language is not English, and elderly people as subjects requires additional care in the informed consent process. For each of the vulnerable populations, you will need to indicate if the population is targeted or included, why you have included or targeted that population, and how you will address obtaining consent. Subjects who do not speak English must be presented with consent documents or with consent scripts in their native language or a trade language that they are comfortable using. Cultural sensitivity is required for working in other countries and with protected groups. All protections under U.S. law for human subjects still apply. Care must be taken to avoid coercion, especially if compensation is provided. Mentally, emotionally, or developmentally disabled persons and the elderly, persons over 65 years old, may or may not be mentally capable of giving informed consent. You will need to specify how you will determine if these subjects are capable of legally giving consent. If not capable of legally giving consent, these individuals will need to give assent after consent is given by their parent or legal guardian. Many individuals classified by the Human Subjects Protections as elderly may still be engaged in work or other occupations or activities indicating their continuing mental competence. Researchers should not assume because of age that they are not capable of legal consent. Older persons who are institutionalized or under care for memory disorders may not be able to give consent, however, and will need an assent process. If conducting research with children, teens, persons with cognitive disabilities, elderly persons, or other protected groups, the researcher must breach confidentiality if he or she observes activities that indicate a research subject is being abused or put in danger. For these reasons, consent forms sometimes say, "will be kept confidential to the extent allowed by law," as the law requires reporting of potential abuse. Gender imbalance. This item is included because of a history of research that excluded women and minority participants. It's possible that your research subject pool might be currently mostly or all of one gender, such as professional harp players, or your research may focus on a particular gender or group, such as the changing male voice. You will need to explain and justify that here. Deception involves not being straightforward about what topic the research engages. This is sometimes done because knowing what the researcher is studying might cause participants to change their responses. Your consent form, recruitment materials, and other information about your project should represent the research aims and activities truthfully unless you have specifically indicated in your IRB protocol that you are using deception and the deception has IRB approval. Part 1. Why do you feel it is necessary to use deception? What are you being deceptive about? Why those aspects? Explain your answers to these questions in the box. Part 2. When deception is used, subjects must be debriefed, informed of the true nature of the study and the reason deception was used. The debriefing should include an apology for deceiving them. Explain the debriefing process. When and by whom will they be debriefed? Part 3. If deception is employed, subjects must be given an opportunity after they are debriefed to withhold use of data obtained under deceptive conditions without losing any benefits to which they are entitled for participating in the research. Explain when and how subjects will be asked if they wish to withhold their data. Part 4. Upload the debriefing materials or script that will be provided to subjects to explain the deception. If your participant pool engages female participants of childbearing age, it is always possible that one or more will be pregnant. If your research is already low risk, does not involve minors, and does not cause additional risk for a pregnant woman, you will probably be answering no to all the questions but the first one. If there is more than minimal risk to pregnant women or fetuses in this research, explain in the box under Part 2 what risks might be encountered and how you will minimize them. If your research would potentially be harmful to a pregnant female participant or her fetus, you will either need to screen out pregnant participants or take added precautions with such participants to minimize risks and maximize benefits, and you must make clear in the consent form what the risks would be if a participant is pregnant. If your study involves neonates, you will need to check the appropriate boxes and also include extra care to minimize risks and maximize benefits. The use of protected health information. This form will only appear if you indicated your study will involve protected health information. Part 1. You must indicate how you intend to comply with HIPAA by checking the correct box. Parts 2, 3, and 4. Answer the questions. The answer to Part 3 is probably no. All research involving persons under the age of 18 requires both parental consent and minor assent. Though the parent has said it is okay for the child or student to participate in research, the minor has the right to decide for him or herself whether or not he or she wants to participate. Assent forms must be age appropriate, at a reading level that fits the age of the child or student. Assent scripts may be used with younger children. Part 1. Indicate the age of children involved in the research. Part 2. If the children are at a normal maturity level for their age, say so. If developmentally delayed, indicate that. Part 3. Answer the question. Normally, the answer will be no, unless you are specifically studying children who are wards of the state, such as those in foster care. Part 4. If the research is more than minimal risk, answer no. If it is minimal risk, answer yes. Part 5. Explain the assent process. If the child's parent has given consent, how will you ask the child for assent? The process should be age appropriate, meaning simple assent scripts for very young children and written assent forms at an appropriate reading level for older minors. Part 6. What is your process for gaining written consent from the child's parents or guardians? Outline the process here. Will forms and a letter be sent home from school, or will some other process be used? You must include as attachments the consent forms for parents, the assent forms or scripts for minor children, and all communication materials used to recruit these participants. Upload all the materials that your subjects will see, including the invitation to participate, advertising and recruiting materials, consent and assent forms or scripts, interview or focus group questions, surveys or questionnaires, debriefing script or materials, and any other materials. Allow at least a month for the protocol approval process, twice that if applying to more than one IRB. Protocols that go to full committee normally clear within a few days after the full committee meeting, but it may be as much as 6 weeks between submission and full committee review. Protocols that are approved for expedited review may take 1 to 4 weeks for the IRB committee member to review them, depending on the time of year and that person's schedule. Approval of the protocol normally extends for 1 year. If the research will extend longer than a year, a protocol renewal is required. If you make changes to your protocol after it is approved, you must submit them for approval using a change of protocol form prior to implementing the changes. If something goes wrong and a participant is harmed, you must submit an incident report. This concludes the video on preparing your IRB protocol. For more information regarding specific topics introduced in this video, see the Florida State University Human Subjects Committee website.